Are you stuck in the same old routine at work? Do you find yourself hitting a creative wall, unable to see beyond your current perspective? It's time to break free and unlock the power of fresh perspectives. I'm David Gouthro. I'm trying to find a more unique way of saying I'm back again, but I'm back again. So today I have the pleasure of, with me as a guest, Martin Parnell in Cochrane, Alberta. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you, David. Great to be here today.
Now, Martin, when we were talking just before I started recording, you were talking about a particular area of passion for you. You just come back talking about it in the UK and had to do with Afghanistani women. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what this is all about? It sounds quite intriguing.
Well, this started in 2016 when I went over to Afghanistan to run a marathon in support of Afghan women and girls. And the reason I went is a year prior, I'd read about the very first Afghan marathon in Afghanistan, and there were 60 runners, 10 international runners, and 50 Afghan men and one Afghan woman. And I was kind of, this is wow, because I love running. I've done lots of marathons, and I really enjoy it. And so I started reading the article. It was in the Guardian newspaper, and it talked about some of the challenges that this particular woman had in training. And when I train, it's the weather or hydration or nutrition. But for Zainab, it was men yelling at her, "You're a prostitute, get off the streets," and throwing chunks of concrete at her to stop her training.
Wow.
And so I thought, oh my gosh, but what happened is she didn't stop, and she went home and she went inside her walled garden, and she ran hour upon hour upon hour in training, running around inside her walled garden. And she went to a little town called Bamiyan in the foothills of the Hindu Kush Mountains and ran a marathon. And I was that kind of struck a chord with me. I'd been recovering for the previous year with a clot on the brain, and I just couldn't believe how unfair it was that in Afghanistan men could run but not women, and women were persecuted. So I said to my wife, Sue, if I get better, if I can run again, if I can run a marathon, I'm going to go to Afghanistan and support Zainab and these women in their quest to run for freedom and equality. And 1 year later, David, I was on a flight from Calgary to Frankfurt to Istanbul to Kabul. And that's when I ran my very first marathon Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Zainab couldn't run it, but I ran with a young woman named Kubra, and we finished the race together. And ever since then, I've stayed in contact with a number of women in Afghanistan, and the journey has just continued.
So I can't help but wonder if maybe setting that out as a goal and an objective helped to speed your healing. Because that's pretty incredible, the healing to start with, but to have that as sort of a carrot out in front of you to draw towards it is pretty amazing.
Well, absolutely. In fact, I think even as a general comment, when we have challenges, mental or physical, I personally think if we have a goal to shoot for, it really does help us along that journey of recovery, and or have a vision or have a view. And David, there's no question that helped me along that journey to get to Afghanistan in 2016. In fact, I went back again in 2018 to run with the women and girls again, and really formed a pretty close tie with them. And things were looking good at that time. This was in 2018. However, in August of 2021 is when the world changed. The Americans pulled out of Afghanistan. The Taliban swept across the country in a matter of weeks, and they took over control, and suddenly everything changed.
So no more marathons at all, and no more women involved, or what was the impact of that?
Absolutely. You may have seen the TV footage of all the Afghan men and women and boys and girls trying to leave Afghanistan on the flights. It was absolute chaos. Some of them got out and some of them didn't. And when the Taliban came back in, they had been out of power for 20 years. So since 2021. So imagine that these girls and women had lived most of their lives in relative freedom. It wasn't great, but they could still, do marathons and be part of the political scene and part of the medical scene. Suddenly that all changes. It was illegal, and it is illegal for women to do sport. And a number of these women had to get out of Afghanistan under threat of death. And in fact, one group came to Calgary, 16 young women. and they were the Afghan women's cycling team.
Oh,
And I got to meet them.
huh.
Amazing group of women, but they had to leave because they were under the threat of death for cycling. And this is a situation that has developed since then. Many Afghan refugees have come over. Canada took 40,000, and a number of them came to Calgary. Kubra, who I ran with, moved to Toronto. So she's in Toronto now. And Zainab, who was the woman who inspired me, has now moved with her husband and daughter to Rochester in New York. So,
So, Martin, I want to roll back just a little bit and just give people a little more perspective on running a marathon, because it wasn't like this was your first marathon. So give me just a little bit of background on that. Then I'd like to dive into that experience from the moment you got off the plane for that first marathon that you ran in Afghanistan. But let's give a little context for the conversation.
absolutely. So I started running late at the age of 47. As a kid, I was known as huggable. The politically correct term is fat. So
Oh,
I was a bit of, yeah. So I was a bit of a chubster. And so at sport, I wasn't very good. And I was always picked last for any team, in England, which is where I'm originally from. If it was soccer or rugby or cricket, I was always Parnell's last, and so that wasn't a great success with sport. However, my parents really encouraged us to do sport for the love of sport. So I did tons of different sports, but never anything to any degree. And it wasn't until the age of 47 when my younger brother challenged me to a marathon, and you can't say no to a younger brother. But I thought, okay, I better, I better take this on. So I ran my first marathon in 2003 in Calgary. That was my very first marathon with my two younger brothers. And I got hooked, David. I really got hooked on this running thing. And I ran another one. And I wasn't too bad. In fact, I qualified for Boston. So I was pretty happy with that. Yeah, I was the runner was in me, David. It just took 47 years to come out. And so, so I started running. I did marathons. I then decided to do triathlon. I thought, why not triathlon? I couldn't swim, but I learned to swim and did triathlon and eventually doing Ironman. And I eventually got into ultra running. So that's races anything above a marathon, 50K, 100K, and 100 milers. So I was really, if I have a gift, David, just to let you know, and my gift is doing long, slow, boring things.
he sounds like my work career.
Oh, yeah, I tell you, that's the gift that I have. And so I was running these marathons, and I was training for a 100-mile race, the Lost Souls in Lethbridge. And then one evening I met a friend of mine who was told me about an organization called Right to Play.
Hmm.
And they're a humanitarian organization. They help kids around the world with play and sport. And we started talking about fundraising. And so I got the idea of running 250 marathons in 1 year.
Wow.
And so in 2010, with a lot of help from a lot of people, I ran the 250 marathons around Cochrane mostly, but also at schools. And we raised $320,000
In 1 year.
in 1 year, David. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a tough year. I mean, I had some injuries and stuff, but we managed to do it, finished on December 31st, 2010, raised a bunch of money. And that sort of got me going into doing some other, what I call quests or fundraisers, 5 Guinness World Records in endurance events, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in 21 hours. I'm running the coast of England, a marathon a day for a month. And so after that, at the end of it, we raised $1.3 million. So running marathons was not unusual for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it was, so in fact, I was, and of course, then I had the clot on the brain, which stopped everything for a year. It was a really tough go. I was on a cocktail of drugs, but slowly I got walking and so on. And that's when I read about Zainab, David. And you're right. That's when having that goal definitely helped me along my recovery path.
That's amazing. Like, I think some people think that running one marathon would be huge, but the other part of it is that, when you had this brain clot, it wasn't like you ran the occasional marathon. It was very much a part of your life, part of your identity almost, at that point.
Well, absolutely. I mean, suddenly from doing these challenges, these quests and really putting myself out there, my world flipped upside down where I was in hospital in Winnipeg in an induced coma for 24 hours. And my wife, Sue, got called to come to the hospital because they didn't know what was going to happen. And I needed help to go the 20 feet from the hospital bed to the washroom. I mean, everything changed. I had issues with my eyes. It was a complete mess. And I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And then they said, okay, the top guy is in Calgary, the surgeon, the neurosurgeon. So I went back to Calgary and I saw him, and slowly I started to walk, and it slowly came back, but my world flipped upside down. Absolutely.
Well, at that time, almost like walking in those few steps was a marathon of a different sort in terms of the effort required to really go for it and stay committed to it. That's incredible.
Well, absolutely. In fact, it's sort of not humorous, but it was interesting that the first race I did after that, in fact, I did a race at the Calgary Marathon in May. I had the clot in the vein in February, and it was, normally it would have been a marathon, but this time it was a 5K walk.
Wow.
A 5K walk, and a group of us lined up. I had my sticks, and I slowly walked, and I finished the race, the 5K walk. I was holding hands with a little girl, Clarissa, who was 4 years old, and we were holding hands heading towards the finish. I said, Clarissa, wouldn't it be great if we finished together and we put our arms up? And it was just so uplifting. However, 50 meters from the finish, Clarissa let my hand go and dashed across the finish line. And she said, I win, I win, I win, which, David, I learned a good lesson there. Do not trust children, David. Seriously, do not trust children, okay? They will, yeah. But anyway, no, it was great. I just felt great having finished the 5K, and I was so happy for Clarissa. That was her first race.
So I promise you, Martin, if I have another podcast around good parenting tips, I won't invite you back for that one. So you've gone through that. Now let's start this journey. So you're going over to Afghanistan. Let's start from you get up in Calgary and you head to the airport. So walk me through the steps so people can picture this journey.
Oh, that's a great question. So the problem was right off the bat that I didn't have a visa. So on the day of the flight, I'm still waiting for this visa, the Afghan visa from Ottawa, because there was all sorts of trouble trying to get this visa and misunderstandings. So anyway, I get a call in the morning. My flight is early afternoon. The visas finally arrived at the airport. So I literally drive to the airport, pick the visa up, and then stand in line to fly out. I mean, it was that close. Yeah, it was that close. Anyway, I got the visa. I flew out. The trip was pretty uneventful, going to Frankfurt, Istanbul, and then landing in Kabul. So landing in Kabul is a whole different world. I'd never even thought I would go to Afghanistan. I had no reason to go, but here we are. I'm in the Kabul airport, and I go in, and there's security people. They all got the guns, but they let us through. It was still the government that's running it. And I go outside, and there's somebody to meet me. And what I had done is I had signed up with a group called Untamed Borders, and they're literally sort of a travel group that take people to conflict countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran. So I signed up with them. And in fact, they were the ones that had organized the race as well. So that was one thing. I wasn't going to do it on my own. There's no way. But, going with this group, we, I came out into the sun, beautiful sunny day in late October of 2016. And there was a couple other runners who had flown in with me. There were 10 runners in total. And we got into 2 vans, a very kind of low key, and we drove to a guest house that first night. And that first night we stayed in the guest house. We met each other. But we still had to be kind of low key with this. The next day, we went out for some sightseeing in Kabul. And we went to the blue-tiled mosque, an absolutely beautiful mosque in Kabul. But around the corner, which surprised me, there was a playground. And the playground that had been built by the mums and dads and the community for the children. And it sort of made me realize that, we think we're so different in terms of, going to Afghanistan and other countries. But in many ways, we're the same. Kids need to play. And the playground had a Ferris wheel, handmade, swings, roundabouts. So, this was something that really kind of, surprised me, to be honest. We went back to the guest house, and the next morning we flew out from Kabul, northwest, 140 kilometers, to the town of Bamiyan. Now, Bamiyan is a province and a town that is very open to having women do races. Oh, so that's why we went there. Yeah, they have a very they're Hazara people, and they're very open to that. We landed in Bamiyan, and it's at 9,000 feet, so it's high up there in the foothills of the Hindu Kush Mountains. Again, we got out of the little airport, and we were met by two vans again, and we headed into the town. But interestingly, heading in, I noticed just on the right hand side there was a farmer with an oxen plowing a field, but he was plowing around several objects, and what they were burnt out Russian tanks.
Oh,
And this is when Russia tried to take over Afghanistan, and they were repelled, but they've left all these tanks, in Afghanistan. So yeah, we arrived to the guest house, and we settled in for the first night.
wow. Okay, keep going.
Okay.
What, but I've been, it must have really been like I'm just feeling if I was there and arrived and saw the tanks plowing around the tanks, just the reality of that. It's one thing to see it remotely when you're reading about it or hearing it, say in the news, whatever, but then to actually see how life builds on around that must have been incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. I mean, there was a sense of history there because with Afghanistan, the British and the Russians tried to take over the country, and they were repelled. And in fact, no foreign entity has colonized Afghanistan. They've never had somebody come in. So, it says a lot about the people who and how strong they are and how they repelled these two empires. And so that yeah, absolutely that struck me. We came to the guest house and we kind of settled in. The next day, we were taken on a trip to the one national park that Afghanistan has, and it's called Bandamir. And it was about 40 kilometers to the west of Bamiyan. And we went in the two vans. But what this national park is, it's amazing aqua blue lakes
Hmm.
with huge sandstone cliffs. And so we were there. We walked around on the trails. But what was incredible was when we finished, we came down to a little tourist information booth. But I looked across, and on the shore there was a flotilla of 12 swan paddle boats.
Oh,
Yeah. So I just couldn't even swan paddle boats. So I said to the tourist information person who spoke great English, "What's this all about?" Well, he says on the weekends, families come and they have picnics and they go into the paddle boats and they paddle around the lake. And I'm thinking, my gosh, like this is just the same kind of thing that we do,
yeah.
whether we're Alberta or BC, we go to the lakes, we like to paddle, do paddleboard or whatever. And here they have these paddle boats. And so again, it was another case of just being surprised by what I saw in Afghanistan.
And I think that's so great. I think, I'm kind of perpetually curious and I love to be surprised by things. And it's nice when something out of that seems so out of place, but then you realize how in place it actually is, right? In terms of,
That's yeah, absolutely, David. Yeah, and again, we saw families there, and they were just enjoying the day, and so that was kind of an uplifting thing to see. However, in the afternoon, I was taken to a huge cliff. So in Barmian, the site that really impacts you is a huge sandstone cliff with two 50-meter Buddhas that were cut out.
oh,
And in these Buddhas were actually blown up by the Taliban in 2001. So all you see is the huge cutout. But I was taken there because there are caves in these sandstone cliffs, and these caves have been there a long, long time in the past. Holy men would stay there in the caves. But what was interesting is we were told that when the archaeologists looked at these caves, in the roof of the caves, they found oil paintings. And what's interesting is these are the oldest oil paintings in the world. So the oldest oil paintings aren't in Athens, aren't in Rome, but are in Bamiyan in Afghanistan.
huh.
And it seems kind of strange, but it's not when you look at history, because Bamiyan was on the Silk Route, and the Silk Route was the top trading route in the world. And so Bamiyan was a center. It would have silks, it would have pottery, it would have
Hmm.
spices. At
Wow.
one time, it was one of the biggest trading locations in the world, and these oil paintings were painted there. So again, David, something that we kind of forget about, think about Afghanistan being a backward, very poor country. Well, at one point, it wasn't. So that was striking.
It's pretty easy to hold on to our totally inappropriate misperceptions.
Absolutely.
So now you said that this is at 9,000 feet. Now, I'm not a runner by any means. I walk on occasion, but I do remember being down in the Pecos Wilderness in New Mexico, and even just playing tennis at 9,000 feet. Need special balls with different pressure, and just how quickly I got winded. So the thought of running a marathon from someone that, now at sea level here, it's different. You're a little bit higher in Calgary, but that in and of itself, with everything else on top of it, adds to the physical challenge, I would think.
Well, absolutely. I mean, think where you are at sea level. I think we're around 4,000 feet here in Cochrane, where I am. This is at 9,000 feet. And so when I started doing some training runs out of the guest house, my lungs were like I had vices on them.
Huh.
For the first 5 minutes, I was just sucking wind. And now slowly it eases up. And I'm quite frankly, I wasn't, I'm not running this to set a time. And so I slowly got into the groove. But I mean, this was a very big challenge. And so slowly we got into it. And with the training runs. And so as we approached, you know, the marathon, I started to feel a little bit better, and that's when I met Kubra. Now Kubra, she is a runner, and she's done some longer runs, ultras, but she had stopped training 4 months before because there was an explosion at her university, and her best friend was killed.
Oh,
And so she had stopped training, and I was asked to talk to her. There's an organization called Free to Run, and they had supported these women. There were going to be 6 women running this time in the marathon, which was great. One in the first time, and one of them was Kubra. And I was asked to talk to Kubra because Kubra still wanted to do the marathon. But I realized without training, this is almost impossible. And I was asked to speak to her. So I did. We went on a big walk, and I said, Kubra, I don't think you can do this marathon. Why don't you do the 10K? Well, she said, Martin, I've been training. I was training, but she said I had to take some very special gear with me when I trained. And I thought, well, I take water bottles, and I take electrolytes and different things. Well, Kubra and her friend would take knuckle dusters and a pepper spray. I said, Kubra, why do you take knuckle dusters and a pepper spray? She said, well, when men come to try and kidnap me and my friend, we're not going to let them. So
wow.
that's pretty incredible. Yeah. So she was a very determined young woman. So end of the day, I said, no, Kubra, I think you should do the 10K. Well, David, that night I thought about it, and really Kubra needed to run that marathon. So I thought maybe if I ran with her, we did it together, I might be able to do it. So the next day I spoke to Kubra. What do you think, Kubra? Shall we run together? Oh, she was so excited, David. She was just so excited. And so the next day we're at the start line of the marathon of Afghanistan.
Okay. So here we are. Listeners, we are now race day.
Race day.
Okay. Get us started here.
Race day. Oh my gosh. So the race started under the huge cliff where the cutouts of the Buddhas were. Amazing start line. And the first race was the 10K. And there was 150 runners, of which 100 were Afghan schoolgirls.
Oh,
So that was just wonderful. I mean, they were so excited. There was some girl guides there, and they were running. So that race started at 8:00, and they headed off. At 8:30, the rest of us lined up, and there was 100 runners. There was 10 overseas runners, and the other 90 were Afghan men and 6 Afghan women, which was a bit of a increase from the previous year. So I said to Kubra, stay at the back. If we have any chance, stay at the back, because we need to start off slowly. Now, the cutoff time, a security cutoff time, was 7 hours. So if we wanted to do this, David, we had to do it under 7 hours, or they would sweep us off the course. We would be off the course. So the horn went off, and I always run 9 minutes and walk 1. So I said, Kubra, we'll do these 9 and 1s, and we'll see where we go. Well, we did this for the first 14K. Now, I should point out, the start elevation was 9,000. The turnaround was 10.5.
okay. Why
I did
not?
again, 10.5. All right. And so we knew that first half was going to be tough. Well, at 14 kilometers, Kubra says, oh, I'm starting to get stomach aches. I'm starting to get, some cramps. I said, come on, Kubra, let's walk. So we walked to the turnaround, 21.1 kilometers, but we were there at 3 hours and 36 minutes. At that pace, we were not gonna make the 7 hours. On the plus side, it was a downhill run. So we started running. Things went well for about 10 kilometers, and then the wheels came off. Kubra says, I can't run anymore. Says I have to walk. So we started walking. Now we got to we had to the 1.5 kilometer mark to the finish, and we had 15 minutes to go. At that pace, we were not going to get there. We were not going to finish in time. And I said, Kubra, I don't know. She said, let's go. She started running.
Hmm.
Running after all this time. I could not believe it. So she started running. I joined her, and we ran across the finish line in 6 hours and 52 minutes.
Wow.
So
Oh,
we
my God.
8 minutes. So we made it by 8 minutes, and you know
Hmm.
it was just amazing. I was just so happy to run with Cooper. I mean, she was thrilled. It was one of my slowest marathons ever, but it was one of my best. And so that was such a highlight. And we left pretty soon afterwards. She had to go back to Kabul. I went back to Canada, but we stayed in touch. But it was just an amazing, amazing moment.
Well, it certainly redefines winning.
You know what? You're exactly right. It's all in perspective. It's all about personal goals and about working with each other.
Just need to take that in for a sec,
I-
Martin.
I'm tired now, David. I'm tired. That was
Exhausting for sure. Well, that's absolutely an incredible achievement, Martin. For you to do that, to be drawn to it, to speed your healing, and then to do it, and to walk with this Afghanistani woman who's now safely here on our side of the ocean. That's
well,
that's
that's right. I mean, and that's a plus. However, there are still 20 million Afghan women and girls over in Afghanistan. And so one thing that I've been doing is working with a group of Afghan women who are living in Afghanistan over the last 2 years. And we have formed a Rotaract Club, which is part of Rotary.
okay.
Uh,
And what's that? So Rotaract, I've not heard that term before.
yeah, so the Rotary organization is across the world in 191 countries, 1.4 million members. I'm a member of the Rotary Club of Cochrane.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I've been a member for 14 years now. But with Rotary, there are three other types of clubs. There is what's called Rotaract, which tends to be a younger group, 18 to 30. And then there is Interact, which is high school, and Early Act, which is elementary school. So
So I just want to make sure people can hear that it's Rotaract ACT. Is that right?
yeah, yes, Rotaract.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, absolutely, Rotaract. So around the world, there are 10,000 Rotaract clubs.
Hmm.
And so I was thinking, what could I do to try and bring a group of Afghan women together? And in fact, one thing I did was I taught a 12-week course for an organization called Classroom Without Walls. And they supply online education for students in Myanmar, in Ukraine, and Afghanistan. And so this course I taught was called The Adventures of Marathon Martin and Friends.
Huh.
And it was, yeah, very lots of fun, once a week.
Yeah.
Once a week for 12 weeks. And there was 40 Afghan women who were in this course. And at the end of the course, they were asking me, how can we stay together? Like, once the course finished. So I came up with the idea of setting up this Rotaract Club online. So I asked the 40 women who would like to be part of the club, and 25 said yes. So then I approached Rotary International about making this club official. And there was a lot of work that went into security, making sure everything was, above board. And on September the 1st last year, we chartered the Rotaract E-Club for Peace and Education.
Wow. Wow.
And so we've been meeting since then every 2 weeks. And we have a president. Her name is Marwa. She's 19 years old, David. And she's in Kabul, amazing young woman. And we have a young woman called Manvi, who is part of the Rotaract Club of Kabul University. So she's the advisor to Marwa, and I'm the Rotary advisor. And so each week we have meetings, we have topics, we have guests. We had a number of guests from all walks of life. And so it's a way of keeping this group together. And we hope to do more projects with this group of young Afghan women.
Well, it's a really, really powerful model. And, one of the things that occurs to me that one of my friends is a wonderful performing artist, Janice Stanfield. And a line in one of her songs, and I'll probably get it not exactly right, but the notion of it is something along the lines of, you can't do all the world needs, but the world needs all that you can do. Right. And I think this is such a fabulous example of that. And I, again, trying to put myself in your shoes, having met these people in Afghanistan and worked there, I would always have something in the back of my mind, either consciously or unconsciously thinking, I hope they're okay in
Yeah.
that world. Like,
Yeah, absolutely, David. And one thing they do say to me and to really anyone they talk to is, don't forget about us. The news cycle is such that, if it's not Trump, it's Gaza, and if it's not Gaza, it's Syria. And absolutely, I understand all of that. But here's a group, 20 million women and girls that are being persecuted for gender. And unfortunately, to a great degree, it just doesn't come up. It's just not on anyone's radar.
mhm.
And it's just, I think, since 2016, so gosh, it's been, 9 years now that I've been involved. As you say, we can all do a little something. I mean, if we can't change the world per se, but we can do a little bit, and maybe lots of little bits would change the world. So this is just a passion, and this is just something that I think I can do and help. And so that's all I can do.
No, the only other thing, or another thing that occurs to me is just the notion of braver together. That creating environments where people can support each other in doing those brave, courageous things that they're doing. That sometimes just going out in the middle of the day is an act of bravery for some people. So I think this is absolutely inspiring, Martin. I'm so glad that you agreed to be on this podcast.
Well, David, it's an absolute pleasure. I always enjoy chatting with you and sharing stories and just looking at life as, I think, it's exciting but it's tough. It's tough. And, there are challenges, whether it's within families or, with friends and so on. There's some difficult things going on, but we got to work together. It's too hard otherwise.
Well, and so I keep saying the last thing that occurred to me, but another one is that, I think uh, it's too easier for us to not have to think about how much inconvenience or discomfort we're willing to put up with. There's so many other people that's constant. And I think, what moves us forward and, keep us from just being benign about all the nasty things happening in the world is, if comfort is our primary driving value and convenience is a value, it totally gets in the way. And that, to be willing to live with some discomfort and some inconvenience, but with noble purpose behind it, I think is something we could all perhaps aspire to. And I think you're a fabulous model of that. So.
Well, thank you. And again, I think there's so much noise going on. There's so much kind of, clutter going on. If we can see rather than just look, then there's opportunities, and they'll pop up every single day. When you go out and you head to the shops or whatever, there are opportunities just to make a little bit of a difference, whether it's just helping somebody or just doing a little something. They're there, but you have to see them.
You have to be willing to open your eyes. And Martin, I'll get some information from you after this call that I can put in the program notes about how people can find out more about Rotaract and all kinds of different things and some of the initiatives that I can't speak at the end. I'm a professional speaker. I just don't do it well. So Martin Parnell, thank you so much for being here with me today on Discover Fresh Perspectives.
David, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And for those of you listening, come on back next week and we'll get some more different perspectives. Thank you so much. Subscribe now because on Fresh Perspectives, every episode is an opportunity to explore new horizons and redefine what's achievable.